Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sensitivity Doctors. This is Dr. Kelley. Today, I did a solo episode because Jean was not feeling well. She actually had an anxiety relapse, which we are going to talk all about in another episode. She just really wants to, share her experience and support all of you if you ever have the same thing happen. But I just really appreciate she was so open and vulnerable and let me know what was going on and asked for help and support, which is what we always try to encourage. So hope you're feeling better, Jean. But today I got to talk to a fabulous practitioner named Michelle Oravitz, and she's out of Florida. She is an acupuncturist, specialist in fertility health. She absolutely loves everything related to Chinese herbal medicine, and she used it in order to regulate her own cycle, which was inspiring to her and actually made her leave the field of architecture to go into acupuncture to help women and families regulate their bodies and get the dreams they want when it comes to fertility. So this conversation was great. I will say I shared a bit of my own story and also explored how it's not just acupuncture, which we do kind of lay out how it works, I think in a pretty understandable way, but also things like our biome, our heart health, our environmental health. So if you are interested in improving your fertility or just your overall reproductive health in general, this is absolutely the episode for you. Enjoy.
Welcome to the Sensitivity Doctors podcast. Here we explore everything from overcoming anxiety to living in a world not always designed for our sensitive wiring. Whether it's navigating business, parenthood, overcoming trauma, or getting what you want out of your relationships, we invite you to this empowering journey of self-compassion and growth. Sit back, relax, and here are your hosts.
I am thrilled to have you here today. I have to say I've been pretty open just in my own work that fertility was a journey that I had gone through and was actually what kind of led me into the trauma work that I do and, the modalities that I offer. And so I'm really excited to hear from you because acupuncture was part of my fertility journey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I feel like what I went through will probably really align with a lot of what you do and what you're recommending. So just to get started, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your journey of, I just find it so interesting that you went from a completely different field into this. So maybe start there.
Of course. And Dr. Kelley, thank you so much for having me today.
Of
And
course.
yes, my background was a completely different background. I was an architect, and I had irregular periods really from the time I was 13 when I first started getting my period, and didn't really think much of it. In the beginning, they always say like things can be irregular for the first couple of years. Don't worry about it. And then when I was 17, my mom took me to a GYN and said, and I really thought like, oh, he would know exactly what to do. It's going to get fixed. I'm going to walk out with a plan. And all I walked out with was the birth control pill. And I was
13.
essentially, no, 17.
Okay.
So this is 3 years after irregular periods.
Gotcha.
And, 4 years at that point. And then he told me if I was going to take the birth control pill that I would pretty much get regular periods. And I said, well, I'm not sexually active. I thought that was the only reason it was like birth control. And he said, no, it just gets you a regular period. And I said, well, what happens if I get off? And he said, well, you're going to go back to how you are now. And I was like, well, that makes no sense whatsoever. It was like my first taste of that, I guess, which I know now a lot of people really kind of go through that, not really getting a solid answer, like some kind of resolution. And then also being told that there are no options.
Right.
So, for years I really thought that was the case. But I think that because growing up I had a grandmother who was very much into natural remedies. And she actually was always so I'm not, my husband's a doctor. I think there's a place for both. You can't only rely on natural medicine. You can't only rely, you have to kind of rely on a lot of different things really for your health. So, but she was always leery of taking pills, and she would always be very like, critical thinker when it comes to her medical health. And so I remember hearing that growing up. So I think that caused me to be like that as well. So luckily, it inspired me to not be on the birth control pill the whole time. And I was on and off, and I was still kind of like, there must be something else. So years and years and years later, it just wasn't really top of my priority, to be honest, because, I was still young, whenever, like, I wasn't like,
Right.
oh my God, my menstrual cycle has to be perfect, but I just knew something was off. So years and years later, like, I was 25, and I remember going on a like 3.5 month backpacking trip to Europe and then Cuba. And
Oh,
so,
cool.
which is so much fun. But I was off the birth control pill at the time, and I didn't get my period the whole time. So I was like, okay, this is weird. I came home and to New York, moved back, and I told my mom, like, okay, I have to approach this in a different way than I've been approaching it. And she said, well, I know I've heard of a really good acupuncturist. Let's go see him. It just so happened to be that this acupuncturist not only was an acupuncturist, but in China, where he studied, he was also a gynecologist. So he
Oh,
had
okay.
a specialty in women's health. And I remember him sitting me down, like, asking me so many different questions. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Like, he really wants to know everything. And as soon as, like, you get asked these questions, you want to tell him every little detail. Like, I have this little thing on my skin too. And it's just like all these little things.
Well, I
But you
have you.
feel, yeah, but you feel like you're being really, really heard
Yeah.
and observed. And so it feels like, okay, well, like, everything's getting addressed here. And he sat me down. He said, for a woman, Chinese medicine always sees the menstrual cycle as being a really important factor to her health, to her overall health. And that was the first time anybody's ever said that to me. It's like, oh, that's so cool. So basically, I got the acupuncture. I immediately loved it. I immediately felt drawn to the smell of the herbs. You had dried herbs there, really old school, because now a lot of times we take it as pills, but dry herbs to make tea. And he gave me like a bag, a brown bag full of herbs to make tea at home. So came home, made the tea, and I was just like, this is so cool. Like, this is kind of like the stuff that my grandmother kind of talked about, just natural medicine, natural herbs, everything that comes from the earth. And basically, he regulated my period, like, literally, from, like, I came home that day, I got my period, but I must have obviously ovulated or something that month, or something happened. And he unblocked whatever stagnation I had, and I was getting my period monthly after seeing him, and I was blown away.
From
I
there
was like,
on out?
yes.
Wow.
That's the crazy thing. And now doing this for a living, I know that that's, even as from a practitioner's perspective, that does not happen overnight. Like, I will get a person's period back most of the time, but it's not like an overnight thing. It
Right.
takes a couple of months sometimes. Sometimes things happen right away. Like, I've had people who have been trying to conceive for years. They come to me, and, like, within a month, very, very rarely. It doesn't always happen like that.
Right.
It's a very rare thing, but I was one of those rarities. And I think that the reason is because universal intelligence wanted me to do this. It was kind of like, I think that was kind of one of the signs of my calling. And I was blown away by the fact that it worked. It was unbelievable to me that something so simple with such low side effects actually made such an impact on my body. But what I was surprised by was that even though I was going in for my period, I was also sleeping better. I was feeling better. Like, things that used to bother me at work, or I would get really sensitive about, I felt more at ease. Things rolled off my back easier. I was like, this is interesting. Now looking back, I understand it from, like, a practitioner perspective. I was feeling more flow in my body, and therefore I felt more flow in my mind, and because, like, it's all part of the same mechanism.
System. Right.
So yeah, so it basically awakened a passion in me to do for others what I felt was so impactful in my life, and really, like, literally changed my life.
I think that was literally why I was so excited to have you today, because the story you told was not that different than my own story. I was a very late person to the party as far as menstruation goes. And I think it was because from a very early age, I probably had that irregularity, but didn't understand it as well.
Yeah.
Likewise, if it's not something that's, at the forefront, but again, similar to you, was put on the pill, and not necessarily in my teenage years, but it was a similar trajectory. But I came across acupuncture for fertility because of fertility. So, in my 30s, I had done, early 30s, I had done acupuncture a handful of times just for general stress and things like that, and loved it. With, I'd say, a practitioner who was, and I think this is a good distinction to make for people listening. I do think it's important to find someone who looks at the whole package of a person and looks at each person very individually. Because when I think about your story, I think about these blanket statements that some medical practitioners make. And if they're not looking at you holistically from an individual standpoint, then how can they actually treat you? That would be like me saying every person with depression needs the same coping skills.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't even make sense. And so when we were, trying to conceive, it took a couple years. We weren't succeeding. And so I went to a Chinese herbal medicine practitioner slash chiropractor slash she and her husband do everything. I don't even know what they don't do. And I would love to have them on now that I'm thinking about it. But I remember in the beginning, there were times where I could go to her and say, my cycle's off. And I'd say, I need to go see Dr. Mel to get my cycle. Like that's how well it worked for me. It was amazing. And so when I think about the fact that me personally, things like Chinese herbal teas and acupuncture and diet change and environmental change and stress and all of these things to care for my body did eventually lead to our rainbow babies. But that doesn't always work for everyone. There are definitely people who have to go down other paths like IVF or, other medications, which we should certainly touch on. But my main question is this for people listening who say, okay, it worked for you and it worked for you. Why is it working? I'm really curious if there's a way to say how exactly does acupuncture work for fertility?
Yeah, it's such a good question, a question that I get often, and because people are
Right.
like, "What in the world is it? Like, why is it working? What does it do?" And ultimately, I still think that even though we can explain it as best as possible, I feel like it's such an intricate, intelligent network that even words don't do it justice, and they never will.
No. I mean, that would be like you trying to take thousands of years of practice and distill it into a minute. I get that.
Yeah, but it's also even the verbal language cannot really portray a lot of things that are so incredibly magnificent and aspects of the body, and that's really the body self-healing mechanism. Is just we are wired by a very intelligent system and design, and so ultimately that design is incredible. Like if we cut ourselves, we will scab, we will basically make ourselves our own natural band-aid that will eventually fall off once it needs to, so it's like your body is incredible. It knows exactly what to do. However, when we give the body too many assaults and we basically go against its natural rhythms and everything that it needs to do or needs as far as resources in order to function, then it's going to throw off its natural rhythm, it's going to throw off its natural balance, and that will cause disharmony. And that's where we come in, and we're basically, a lot of us say, we're not the ones that are healing. All we're doing really, this is kind of like, it's sort of like we're healing by taking certain steps to help the body heal. So we're not directly healing. All we're doing is we're creating a situation where we observe and see where are the imbalances, and based on questions, based on pulses, taking a person's pulse, observation, looking at their tongue, looking at their face, their eyes, even like just how they're, we can even listen to the voice. Sometimes it's like it sounds more dry. And so it's kind of interesting because over time you start to hone in on the skill of being able to really truly listen. And when you do that, you could start to see that people have patterns and tendencies and constitutions in their body. And so we have to kind of really assess, where is it blocked and where is it deficient. That's typically, just to kind of like really narrow it down and simplify it, is that it comes down to blocks and deficiencies. So where is there too much excess and where is there too little resource? And typically they'll work hand in hand. When there's blocks, you're also blocking the resources from coming in, and that'll ultimately cause deficiency as well. So usually they kind of work hand in hand. The older we get, the more we live, it gets a little more complicated, and sometimes there's multiple patterns occurring all at the same time. And so through acupuncture and through herbs, which are the two main pillars, but of course there's many different tools in the toolbox of Chinese medicine, we work on the body to support that healing process. And acupuncture helps really well to get that flow. So if you think about it as almost mechanical electrical, so like you're using the mechanical aspect of it to move the energy, to allow the energy to flow through, to open it up. And so you're stimulating it like a machine. It's the easiest way for me to explain it. And it's interesting because I think that we create and we innovate based on our own nature. So if you look at machines, they usually typically will reflect what happens in our body. If you look at highways, compared to arteries, and like smaller streets as capillaries, and we tend to design very similar to how we are ourselves. So you'll see that. You'll see a lot of similarities in like branches and even looking from like an airplane, you could see like how water flows. It's very similar to our vascular system, but then also we design streets like that. So ultimately, if you look at machines, very similar. In order for machines to work, we need the circuit to all communicate with each other. And our internal meridians are similar to circuits, where they carry something called life force energy, or chi. So chi, a lot of times people will call it electricity. Yes, it works like electricity, or it has that as an aspect to it, but it's not just that. It's very intelligent, and it brings basically life force. It carries health, and is really what causes our bodies to move. If you compare, just the physical matter to something that brings it to life.
Right. So if I were to break it down, I'm almost trying to think, I'm a strong proponent for acupuncture, but I'm almost trying to think, if I were a person who didn't exactly buy into this, how would I be feeling about what I'm hearing? And I'm trying to almost compute it in a way that might make sense in a different way. And tell me if I'm completely off, because I might be off. But when I'm probably off. But when you when you say blockages, and when you say, kind of releasing energy and all that, I'm thinking of certain ways that like inflammation works, and certain
That's part of it.
ways, right, and certain ways that injury works. I'm almost thinking of like cosmetology with micro needling. I know this is a funny comparison, but
No,
if
it's not actually.
right. So like when you microneedle, for those who know what it is, like these tiny little injuries to the skin that as a result increase the energy that goes to the skin, that increases things like collagen and healing properties, plumps up the areas that you want to address. I'm thinking of it in a similar way. If you as a practitioner know that this area, this channel, this meridian needs to be flowing well in order for energy to go to the uterus or go to the limbic system or the endocrine system, all these hormonal systems involved in the menstrual cycle, that you as a practitioner are going to cause because that's what the needle is, microscopic.
Yeah, it's controlled injury, basically.
Right, microscopic assault or injury to an area, so that when it's pulled out, there's flow. And it also makes me think of yin yoga too. Like if you're in a posture that's very binding, and something like butterfly pose. Like let's say you're in butterfly, you're leaning forward. In yin, you have to hold those postures for upwards of 5 minutes, because the longer you hold, the more the fascia releases. So when you come out, I'll sometimes explain to people, you might feel a little wobbly, because you're getting this flood of blood and energy and source that wasn't there before. So does that, I'm trying to think of other ways.
100%.
Okay,
You
great.
you are very on point, and I'll tell you exactly why. Well, first of all, when you're talking about yin yoga, that's a mechanical way of getting that flow. Just very similar to what I was saying with acupuncture. You're using the mechanical aspects, but you're getting the flow from that
Right.
as a result. And then also, we work on the meridians, but we also work on local areas. So we're working distal, which is far from the place that we're trying to treat, to basically get the body to react in that way. But we also work locally. So we'll put like needles on the abdomen in the area that we really want that blood flow to happen. What happens in a controlled injury, very similar to microneedling, is you're getting the body's response. We're waking it up. We're saying, hey, here's a
Something's
couple
going on here.
of alarm bells that are low risk. Nothing's really going to happen. There's no risk here, but here's an alarm bell to wake
Yes.
you up, body. So, you have something in here. So what it does is it'll bring blood flow to the area
Right.
to
Have
figure out what's
you,
going on and then build based on that.
did you ever use, and I don't know if this is something you've used, but I remember a couple times my practitioner used these little like electric,
Yep.
I don't know what they are, these electrode things that attach to the needles when they're near, your uterus or your stomach or wherever they're trying to, and it feels like impulse. It's not painful. It's like a little buzz.
Yes. It's a pulse basically, and it's constantly stimulating the point. So like back in the day before we had that, before that modern technology came out with that, what they did was they would stimulate the needles, and they still do it in China, which I think in the US or like modern, like a more Western culture, they don't like pain. In China, they will stimulate those points, and that actually has a really good effect. So what they do is they kind of go in and out with a needle, or they twist it and they move it in
Right.
certain ways to stimulate the points. What electric stimulation does is it creates this consistent stimulation of the points if you
Right.
want extra flow
Yes.
to happen. So they put that as an extra kind of like something to get things moving.
Right. I have the funniest acupuncture story, and then we'll take a left turn and kind of explore some of the things around acupuncture. My practitioner, I love her so much. She's amazing. She was in a training once. I'm not going to name the name of who this person is because apparently they're pretty famous in Europe for
Oh, yeah.
acupuncture. Um, they were in a training, and apparently sometimes fire is used, or is that
Yes.
okay?
For cupping.
Okay, so maybe that's what it was. It was cupping, and they were they were doing fire cupping, and there was a man on the table who was quite hairy,
Oh.
and they lit one of the cups, and the guy's whole back just went like a box of
Oh.
matches.
Oh, wow.
And she said it was just so mortifying. So for you listeners out there, if you're gonna
Yeah.
get fire cupping, beware. It's amazing, but yeah. So
Yeah.
so I love
There's
that we were
something.
able to kind of break this down because I know, some people might be listening who have done it before and maybe have never understood exactly what they were getting, or some who are a little leery about trying it for something that I think, to your point, we've westernized in a way. You need to see the medical doctor, you need to get medicine, or you need to
Yeah.
regulate that, regulate your cycle with the pill. When in actuality, as you said, the body is so intuitive. So in your opinion and your professional opinion, I'm very intrigued by what you think about the state of our nervous system and reproductive health. And one of the reason I'm most interested in this is because as a podcast, we speak to anyone, but especially highly sensitive people. And highly sensitive people tend to have much more sensitive or overactive nervous systems. So I'm so intrigued your take on how the nervous system is involved and what can people do about it.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I am a very highly sensitive
Are
person. I
you? Do you know your
always have
score? Do you know
been.
your Dr. Aaron score from her quiz?
No, but I know that just intuitively. I just know
Mm,
myself when I was younger, and it's honestly like a part of my healing journey has been through things like meditation, yoga, to ease my nervous system. It's impacted my gut. Like I knew that
Yeah.
I'd be very sensitive, and I tend to pick up on people's energy. And it's just like, it's kind of like this, your antennas are like really, really strong. I feel like when you're, and this is all
Yes.
my own take on it. It's not like I'm specialized in this
No,
particular.
but I mean, it sounds on point. And if anything, it
Yeah.
probably is part of what makes you so good at what you do, because a lot of what you do has to be based on like intuition and feeling and sensing what the other
Yes.
person is experiencing. So, welcome to the
Oh,
club.
yes, yes, yeah. So that's first of all, and I do think that a lot of times people who tend to be drawn to healing are
Mhm.
very highly sensitive, and
Mhm.
that's why they connect with the people that they work with through that, like you
Right.
said. So that's the nervous system is incredibly, it's powerful, like
Mhm.
super, super powerful. And it's one of the reasons why acupuncture works so well, because
Mhm.
it regulates the nervous system. It not only helps with fertility, it helps with everything, because it's information.
Mm.
It's basically a communication pathway channel, and it's incredible in on so many levels, and it informs the body really. And I'm very big on stimulating the vagus nerve and the
Love it.
importance of the vagus nerve, and
Mhm.
also the enteric nervous system, which is your gut health. And
Mhm.
how important is that for fertility? I mean, I can't even tell you. Or inflammation and even autoimmune conditions. Like the list goes on and on and on and on. I mean, it's like it matters for everything. So
Mhm.
when your nervous system is out of whack, which most of ours are anyway, because of
Right.
the way we're living, and we're also exposed to EMFs, we're exposed to chemicals which impact that information channel. Like all of that, really what
Mhm.
she is like information flow in a sense. That's
Mhm.
part of it. So when we're able to regulate the nervous system and have it where it's able to adapt, so the stress we cannot eradicate. We know that. It's just the
Right. I mean,
way
that's part of
life is.
living. Mhm.
Exactly. What we can impact is our response to stress and how
Mm.
quickly it regulates. And one of the things that actually, if you really want to like geek out and measure, is Heart Math Institute. I'm not sure if you've looked
I've
into that
heard of it
before.
before. Yes, if you want to tell listeners what you mean by that.
Yes, so I think that that's something that you would love, actually.
Mhm.
So Heart Math Institute, they measure, they use certain devices. They've come up with like certain devices to measure something called heart rate variability,
Mhm.
which ultimately is kind of like how our heart rhythm adapts to
Mhm.
like outside stressors or
Mhm.
stressors in general, how it's able to like come back from
Mhm.
like being really activated to settling down. And that's ultimately a response or a reflection of your nervous system regulation. So when you're in fight or flight, we know that like that is a response to stress, and our blood flow leaves our internal organs and it goes to the arms and legs because we either need to fight or fly, flight,
Mhm.
like a run. So that will be okay short term. That's how the
Mhm.
body was designed. It was kind of like one of those reserves that are saved for emergencies.
Right.
However, when we tap into those reserves, not as an emergency, and it becomes
All the
chronic,
time. Yeah.
then you're depleting your body of what it really needs. And so ultimately, so heart rate variability is one of the ways they look at it. They also look at something called heart brain coherence, which
Mhm.
is
Okay.
fascinating because
I've
it
not heard
basically,
that one before.
yeah.
Okay. So
So
what is that?
basically, what it does is your heart actually has an electromagnetic frequency that's actually, it spans larger and wider than even your brain.
Oh, okay.
And your heart is really impactful, and it impacts your brain and your thinking and your ability to find clarity
Mhm.
and mental peace and stability. And so they found that the higher the coherence between the heart and the brain, the more flow one feels. I mean, just to kind of like really,
How do you know if there's coherence?
so you'll feel more mental clarity. You'll feel
Okay.
more feelings of peace. You'll feel more calm. And if there's incoherence, you'll feel more erratic. Like, have you ever had a time where, somebody's really in, like goes into a major fight or flight, they can't think straight, or they say something that they really regret.
Yes, I
Like,
have a 4-year-old, so yes.
yes. So there's this erraticness, and you can feel
Yes,
it.
for
It's
sure.
very intuitive. I think we all know it from the inside out, and we
Right.
also know it when we see our loved ones like
So
really,
what did you
really
call it
active.
again? The heart rate? Because I'm like between
So
all.
okay, so heart rate variability just simply means that your heart is able to
Recover.
recover, or the variability, the ability for it to move back and forth is higher, and that correlates with heart brain coherence.
That was the one I was curious about. I've heard about heart rate variability before, and it's interesting because it's one of those things that the the more variability, the better,
Yes,
correct? Which
correct.
I think confuses some people because it almost sounds like you're saying in a regular heartbeat, but no, in fact, you're saying my heart has the ability
It's more
to go
flexible.
right. It's more flexible. That's a good way of putting it. And I've
Yeah.
even seen, if people listening are curious, where you can use your Fitbits and your Garmins and all of these things, and they'll give you heart rate variability scores. And that some ways to improve this include things like exercise, meditation. I think exercise is a big proponent. If you're
Yes.
a regular, fitness, someone who's into movement, it has a big impact on your heart rate variability. Is that correct?
Yes. However, with exercise, it's one of those things. If you do too much, it's not
Right.
good.
Because cortisol goes up if you
In
do too
general,
much.
yeah, and it's
Right.
also depleting for your body because you're
Right.
overdoing it.
Right.
So that's so heart brain coherence. What I find so fascinating about it is in Chinese medicine, way before they even measured this or even knew it was a thing, they always describe, as they teach about the body, they say that the heart is actually what houses the mind.
Oh, okay. And the
So,
brain is just the mainframe where it works or something?
well, they don't talk about the brain. They talk more about like the
Oh,
mind.
okay.
And so
Oh, I
they
get
they
you.
they
Yep.
see it like energetically, the heart is what houses the mind. So if the heart is the chi is irregular, or it's too deficient or off, then it can impact the mind and cause states like anxiety, and it's vice versa. It's bidirectional. So if you have a lot of stressors or emotional tolls, it's going to impact your heart chi, your energy.
It kind of makes me think of, there was this time in graduate school where I had been late. My cycle was so late. I was getting a little nervous, and I was in my thesis. I think, yeah, my master's was a thesis. I was in my thesis group, and we go in. We had our very last. I wouldn't want to say test. It was like a meeting or something. I literally got up, clicked open the door, pushed it open, and boom, there was my cycle. It was wild. It was like you're saying, I'm almost envisioning if I was in that fight flight mode or that high cortisol mode, or that the heart and brain were not working, all the blood was in the limbs and keeping me tense, and then as soon as my body thought, okay, now I can actually attend to the center and the other areas of me, that everything flowed back in, and was like, "Oh, okay, you don't have to worry about that anymore. It's time to be regular again."
I'm going to take this a step further. The heart also
Please.
has a really important role on opening the uterus.
Ooh, okay, because you have spoken, I think, in your book perhaps about the heart uterus connection.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very intrigued by that. I've not heard that.
Yes. So in Chinese medicine, they teach about a vessel deep in the body called the Bao Mai,
Okay.
and there's two main vessels that connect different organs to the uterus. One is
Mhm.
the Bao Mai, which is the heart to the uterus and the uterus to the heart.
Mhm.
The other one's called the Bao Luo, which is the uterus to the kidneys and the kidneys to the uterus.
And these are physical vessels.
That's what they teach about deep
Okay.
within.
Okay.
But Western medicine, and they don't really see the vessels. They don't study the vessel because a lot of the vessels are not something that you can see in a cadaver because it's energetic.
Gotcha. Okay.
So those are vessels that they teach about. One
Mhm.
of the meridians, basically, but it's like a deep vessel, and so in order for the uterus to open, like that, the heart has a role of opening the uterus. So what's interesting to me is if you think about like the heart, you think about love and you think that connection, you literally feel it in your heart space when you're snuggling with somebody you love, you could feel it. And so the heart also, we have oxytocin, which is the love hormone that increases at a time that we feel that bonding, we feel that love and that connection. What's interesting is that some of the things that oxytocin was studied for is contractions of the uterus right before labor.
Oh, right. Yeah, as you say that, I'm thinking about, because when you breastfeed right after labor, doesn't it help with the contractions, and breastfeeding increases oxytocin?
Yes, and
Right? Okay.
also the oxytocin is what stimulates labor to begin with, which, if you think about it, what does that do? That opens the uterus for the baby to come out.
Is that connected to Pitocin, which they use for induction?
It's Pitocine's just another hormone. It's
Oh, okay.
another
It just sounded
hormone.
similar, so
Well,
I
no,
just
Pitocin. Yes,
assumed.
yes, yes. No, sorry. Yes. So Pitocin is just it's synthetic hormone,
Uh-huh.
and probably yes, probably connected to
Right.
oxytocin to get things moving.
We'll just assume.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's just assume because
I'll
that's
look it
like
up.
another
I'll
a
look it
whole
up
other
actually.
specialty. But probably, I
Right.
would think probably. So, or at least similar mechanisms of
Mhm.
action.
Right.
And so it opens the uterus. But what also is interesting is that you'll find that oxytocin raises for women around ovulation and for both women and men after orgasm,
Okay.
but more so for women
More.
higher. And that's why women will tend to get more connected and attached after having intimate relations with a
Oh,
man.
okay.
So that's why it's a biological, as much as women want to try to not feel like that and be more
Mhm.
free, it's a biological response
Mhm.
to, that we are pretty much programmed for.
I have heard before. I mean, I think, like you said, orgasm is probably the most escalated form of that. But I have heard, even for couples who are having a hard time connecting, when the very last thing you want to be doing is touching your partner that's frustrating you, even the simple act of, offering them your foot on the on the couch and saying,
Oh,
"Okay, you can rub my
absolutely.
feet."
Yes.
I'm giggling because that's when I'm all
Or
touched
even
out.
snuggling with a pet will increase your
Oh
oxytocin.
yeah.
Yeah, just like that kind of.
So you tell your partner, "I'm gonna snuggle with our cute dog because I'm mad at you. Eventually, I'll wanna hang out again."
Exactly. But those are the things that will increase oxytocin just like biologically in general, like
Mhm,
just that kind of connection. But what's to me interesting is, the body works a lot on rhythms. So
mhm,
why is it that oxytocin not only works for preparing for labor, but it also tends to be high around the time we make babies?
mm.
Why is that? And so Ina May Gaskin, who's a midwife, she wrote a book, and I think there was a quote from her saying the same energy that gets the baby in gets the baby out.
Oh,
And
that's
to
neat.
me, I'm like, she's so intuitive. Like she was
Mhm,
really, really connected because that's exactly what happens. Oxytocin increases around that same time.
mhm,
So it's kind of like interesting because it is something that you feel really connected with. It is
mhm,
something that we feel in our heart space
mhm,
when we have that bonding, that connection. It stimulates that heart area. And that heart has that important role on the uterus opening for
mhm.
menstruation, probably for conception. And for sure, we know that it impacts labor.
And it kinda makes me think, when I'm trying to imagine someone listening who really desperately wants to, have a successful pregnancy, or regulate their cycle, and they're listening and they're thinking, "Okay, well, how can I apply this? How can I live this?"
Yeah.
Um, and I know one of the things about being on a fertility journey is that it can become quite tense, it can become quite stressed, waiting every month to see if your cycle comes, waiting every month to look at the test, frustration when things aren't working. And, it's interesting. I think about right before we actually finally got pregnant with my son, who's the 4-year-old. I had one of those. I'm done. Like, I'm not going to keep doing this. This is too much. Like, next time I go and get my acupuncture, I don't want it to be focused on fertility. I just
Yeah.
want to do acupuncture that's just for me to help me relax. And that was the month I got pregnant. And I'm
Yep.
not saying to stop doing fertility, right?
Yeah.
But there's something about that tension
Mm-hmm.
that was causing this misconnection. And I wonder, you speak about emotions, you speak about chakras. Like, do you think any of this is connected to this tension that can be created around really legitimately wanting something so badly and it's not working?
Absolutely. And this could be
Hmm.
applied to meeting the love of your life. I mean, we
Yeah, for
all go
sure.
through this. Like anything
Hmm.
that we over
Hmm.
try, even a child, I always compare it like a kid that's wanting to catch a ball and he tries too hard, the ball hits him on the head.
Hmm.
He like has a conversation with someone, he totally lets it go. His hands go up and reaches it because he's so connected to his subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is so intelligent. It'll figure
Hmm.
out what to do when we get
Hmm.
out of the way. And it's
Hmm.
just, this is like kind of like the flow of life. It's like what the ancients have been telling us for forever.
Hmm.
Is that the answer, it really is like living in accordance with the Tao, which is the way, it translates as the way, and that Taoism really is at the core of Chinese medicine.
Mm.
And it's creating this harmony, this incredible balance between the yin and the yang. And the yang is very high achieving, and it wants to get everything done, which is great. Absolutely has a purpose.
Hmm.
However, do you want it to be on all the time?
Right.
Sometimes we need to go back and sleep and kind of rest
Hmm.
and let all of that go. And that's when, sometimes I have people who come into me and then sometimes they're like, they just stop calling and I don't reach back out because I give them space because I know that they're in a point,
Hmm.
they don't want to do anything related to fertility.
They just
It's a
need a
pattern.
break.
This is a pattern I see a lot, and it's a very natural pattern because they're like, enough is enough. Like I can't deal with this anymore. And all of a sudden they call me back, I don't know, like 6 months later I'm pregnant. Just like,
Exactly.
or they call me back not pregnant, but they're like, okay, I'm ready to come back. I'm a little more at ease now. I feel better. I took a little break, and then they shortly after get pregnant. And
Right.
it doesn't always happen like that.
No, of
Everything.
course, of
Yeah.
course. Well, and then I think about people who are listening, or people I've known who also go the more kind of Western traditional route because this doesn't work and they do things like IVF. And
Yes.
so I'm curious, how do you think this approach and this type of medicine can help support IVF? Because I don't want those families and women and men who are listening to think, well, I'm doing IVF, so this doesn't apply to me.
Oh, that's such a good question. I'm so happy you brought that up because actually,
Hmm.
probably at times, most of the times, the majority of the people that I work with are doing IVF, and I'm
Oh,
there
okay.
to support it.
Hmm.
So with IVF, I kind of break it down to two parts. The first part is we're focusing on the eggs. We're
Hmm.
doing the retrieval. The retrieval basically means is they give them medications to get the eggs and the follicles to grow
Hmm.
all at the same time because typically one will take up all of the hormones and
Mm.
that one special one is the one that's going to grow and shine and then ovulate for the month. But when it comes to IVF, they will increase the amount of hormones that gets that one to grow so that all of them get it.
Mm.
And they'll get multiple and they'll basically take them out and harvest them.
Hmm.
And then once they harvest them, they take them out, they will fertilize them. They'll let them grow to a certain point, and then once
Hmm.
they're ready, they will fertilize them.
Hmm.
And once they fertilize them, they'll see how long that will take in order to see how they're growing. Then they'll genetic test them to see which ones are normal, which ones aren't. And
Hmm.
most of the time, they will freeze the ones that are normal.
Hmm.
And then phase two is the transfer. And
Mm.
then, so, and that time, I'm not worried, but I focus more on the uterine lining and the
Mm. Okay.
uterus.
Hmm.
So the first phase, which is retrieval, we're worried about egg quality.
Right. That makes sense.
So the Western medicine and the treatment themselves, they are focusing on the quantity. Because the quality,
Right.
you can't really, I mean, of course, they want quality,
Hmm.
but they can't control that. That's something that typically takes about, from my world, 3 to 4 months to implement. A lot of what we're doing will show up in equality because it takes about 3 to 4 months for eggs to mature, and as they're maturing, they are getting the benefits of your nutrients, your gut health, like all the things that we're focusing on
I found that
internally.
so personally in my own journey and interesting. Have you heard of Rebecca Fett?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
love
It starts with egg.
her. I
Oh, she's
love
amazing.
her. She's
Yeah.
amazing. Rebecca, come on the podcast.
Yeah.
She was a huge part of my journey. Like the community she has on Facebook is amazing. And that was the biggest takeaway that I remember. Okay, so what I'm doing right now, how I'm sleeping, what I'm eating, the supplements I'm taking, what I'm putting in my body today is going to have a huge impact on the type of experience I have. Well, if today's, we're in what, October. So
Yeah.
basically, a New Year's baby. Basically what's happening now, a couple months down the line, is going to highlight what I was experiencing now. That was so wild to me that it
Yeah.
wasn't this month's egg is reflecting of this month's behaviors.
Same thing, very similar to sperm health as well.
Right, which we don't talk enough. And I do think Rebecca did a good point with that in her book, about talking about that it's not just up to us. It's also
Yeah.
up to men because it has to do with
Yes.
the health of just because they have, like you said, quantity versus quality. Just
Yes.
because they have quantity their entire life doesn't mean it's quality.
Yes. And sometimes the quantity is also being hurt, which
Yes.
right now it's kind of on a decline. And we don't know, is it, how we're living, or is it toxins, or what is it? But it's impacting right now. We're at a time where things are getting impacted. I mean, there are things that are banned in Europe that are not banned in the US. And
It's
so
scary.
we're hoping that that's going to change. I mean, people I think are complaining enough. And so
Right.
I hopefully,
That
they're
they
going to
should
start
listen.
listening.
Right.
Yeah.
So, if you could think about, there's all these different ways that you can help and support your patients and your readers, with your new book and, the information you put out there. For people listening today, if they could put a handful of practices into place immediately, because we're not all running out with, acupuncture kits and all
Yeah.
of that, what would be maybe 2 or 3 things that you would say, please go do this today to help with your fertility health?
Such a great question. I'm going to give you
You
the
could do
top
more than
things that I,
three.
yeah, no, I can give you a couple. So first of all, meditation. Um,
Okay.
because what it does is it gets you to a state of receptivity. We're always on. Receptivity is more the yin. The yang is that constant like burnout. And that, just if you're living in the world right now in this time, you're going to always tend to be more yang. You're going to be tend to be more responsive to your environment. Sometimes we need to go back inwards. So that will, first of all, move you away from a state of reaction to things that we cannot control, more to a state of receptivity and something that you can't control, which is your internal terrain.
Right.
And when you're doing that too, you are actually accessing, this is what the ancients have been talking about for thousands of years, and they always said, go within, go within, go within. When you're doing that, you're basically accessing a very deep portal within you energetically that will align you to that intelligence within your body. It will also align you to connecting with that, like a self-healing mechanism. It will
Right.
also regulate your nervous system.
Ah.
It will help your sleep, which is
All
really
things
important
that play a
for
role.
hormones. I mean, it's
Right.
like, it's a cascade of events. It's also known, has been shown with Tibetan Buddhist monks that meditate a lot. And neighboring, they studied their gut microbiome compared to the gut microbiome of their neighbors who ate the same food, had access to the same water, just did not meditate as much as the Tibetan Buddhist monks. And what they found was the gut microbiome was way more diverse with the Buddhist monks that meditated
I've
a
never
lot.
heard that. That is so
It's a
cool.
study. It's
That's so
amazing.
cool.
And so
Yeah.
they also found that, so with an enriched microbiome, there's lower inflammation.
Right.
There's a better state of mind too. There's a lot of, this is another interesting study. There's a lot of like emotional imbalances or major depression or anxiety, there's a correlation and a pattern with the gut microbiome and those types of conditions. So the gut microbiome really impacts our mind, our state of mind. Our state of mind impacts really how we use our energy in general. And so when we're depleting a lot of our energy, we are not saving it for really an important goal, which is reproduction, being able to reproduce.
Right.
So that is huge when you get that nervous system regulation through meditation. And if your mind is so active that it's very hard for you to even get to that place, there are definitely things that you can do. You can massage your whole ear every single day. Your whole body is reflected
Did you say
in your ear. Ear.
I wanted to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yep,
I
your
have
ear.
heard, are they called mustard seeds, those little acupuncture points?
Yes. So an acupuncturist could get those specific areas with the seeds, but you
could do it yourself, but
you
just
could
massaging.
just massage your ear,
Right.
just massage it, and it feels really good, and it calms your nervous system. You'll see if you
Okay.
ever get your ear massaged, or even your scalp or your feet. So those things have lots of nerve endings, and it can really relax your whole body. So those are things that you can do for yourself every single day. You can even massage your abdomen. And you could do this if you're so busy, then do it in the shower. Use the soap and just use that to massage your abdomen, your ears, So, and then when you get out, most of us use moisturizer, you can massage your body. So doing that, just that physical, mechanical act, will cause your nervous system to feel more at ease and more relaxed and more calm. So it will ease you and prepare you. A lot of ancient cultures used to do yoga before meditation. Why? Because it calmed the mind. It was kind of like that first initial
That was
step.
the purpose of yoga, was to prepare for meditation. I don't think everyone really understands it's not to just be flexible.
Exactly. And that somatic work works very similar to that. It's just that getting through the body into the mind.
I love these ideas as well for someone who is on a fertility journey, because let's say you succeed, you become pregnant, beautiful ways to take care of yourself while pregnant. You have the baby, beautiful ways to take care of yourself
Yes.
postpartum, because we cannot forget the mother. We cannot forget this temple that creates this life. And so
I just got the chills. No doubt.
I love that. I love those ideas, and I really appreciate that. So the quintessential question, because I'm sure people listening are thinking, where do I find out more about you? Where do I read your awesome new book? And, kind of be part of their journey if they're trying to, whether it be, achieve those fertility goals or just regulate and feel better in their body. Where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you so much. So basically, I've written a book pretty much that outlines like everything that we talked about and more, and it's called The Way of Fertility. However, it has a lot of, because I've had other practitioners read it. A lot of people say this is just a way of life, because fertility is basically a reflection of us being well.
Right.
So I have a lot of information on there that not only helps with fertility, but it helps just in life. And it's about really connecting to that innate intuitive intelligence. So I think women in general might really connect with it, because it is very yin based, but it's really about connecting to that divine feminine essence. And so you can find that on Amazon, and my website is michelleoravitz.com. You can find my podcast on there, like all my information. And typically I love Instagram. I share lots of free tips there, and my handle is at the Wholesome Lotus Fertility. And that's pretty much, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Well, I will be looking for all those things. I will find you on the gram. So thank you so much for coming today and sharing your wisdom and your compassion. And, I encourage everyone to look into everything you have to offer more. And thanks again.
Oh, thank you so much for having me today.
Absolutely. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Sensitivity Doctors. Please be sure to share our video clips on socials and ask your friends to rate and review this podcast.
Yes, sharing these videos makes it possible for your favorite podcast to move up on the ranks so that other people can find it, share it, and learn from it too. So if you can share today, we would really appreciate it.